Okay, time for yin yoga. We will be using props today. I'll do my best to give you options if you don't have props. Some classes are a little bit easier than others. Let's start just by getting the yoga strap ready. So if you have a strap and it's one that you can make a big loop with, do that now so you don't have to do it later. If you have a strap and it doesn't make a loop, no big deal. Just keep it as a strap and that's fine. But take the time to do it now. That way, if you are using it as a loop, you don't have to come completely out of your practice to do it. And you want to make the biggest loop you can with your strap. So we all have different size straps. This one's fairly short, so I definitely want a bigger one. And then you can always adjust it later. So set the strap off to the side. You won't need it. We will start with 2 blocks. We're coming into a back bend using the blocks as support. If you don't have blocks, you can always come into melting heart pose, come to hands and I'll just show it to you, but don't do this if you have blocks. You'll come to hands and knees, bring the elbows down to the mat, walk the elbows forward, forehead comes down to the mat, and you'll do it that way. Or Sphinx works too. If you have blocks, bring 1 block on the medium height right behind you and the other block on the tallest height behind that one. And you can start with this spacing. You can adjust as you start to figure out where the body ends up. So you'll turn to face away from the blocks. Hips and feet are on the mat, legs bent. Start to set yourself down on this first block. You're trying to get the center of the chest lifted. So center of the chest, think about where that is. Lifted, and then use the hands to grab the other block, the tall one, and place that underneath the head for support. And you don't want to feel like the block underneath the head is tilting. It's completely flat on the mat. Sometimes it'll be on a corner and it's wedged and you want it to be flat. So that way you can relax. Arms can come down by the sides. Start with the soles of the feet on the mat wide and the knees touching in the center of the mat. So you just bring some space to the lower back. And you'll close the eyes. Palms can face up. Take a deep breath in through the nose, out through the mouth. Deep breath in through the nose. Slowly out through the mouth. Last one like that. Deep breath in. And exhale out through the mouth. This time in through the nose. Back out through the nose. Keep going with this breath. Start to drop into your yin practice. Preparing the body for stillness, longer holds. So you can take a pause from your day, even if it's just getting started. Take a moment to reset, unplug, so that after your practice, you have more clarity and you feel like a better version of yourself, more centered. These poses are meant for us, our bodies to just get set up in the shape. And then we don't have to do anything else. There isn't any effort that goes into those poses or those shapes. Just stay in them. If you are using props, you can think about where the props are supporting the body, what they're trying to lift and spread. with the legs, heel toe the feet back to hip width distance so the knees come apart, and you can start to slide the legs forward. That deepens the back bend. So if you feel like it's too soon, you can always bring the soles of the feet back to the mat. If it feels good, then stay there. Toes can turn out, legs can be completely relaxed, or just focus on the upper body. You'll start to feel how the body begins to take in the shape, adjust, starts to feel more natural over time. You'll start to wiggle the fingers and the toes, getting some movement in the hands and the feet. Start to walk the feet in. So soles of the feet come back to the mat, knees are bent. Blink open the eyes if you haven't already. Forearms and hands come down to the mat to lift the head up first. And then you can start to come up onto the hands to completely come up off of the blocks. Take the blocks, set them off to the side of the mat, and come back down onto your back. Rest the head down. I think it feels good to extend the legs out in front of you. If it bothers your lower back, then skip it. But just lie here and feel the spine settle. We'll be here for about a minute, just like you would be in Shavasana. This is my favorite part after a back bend like the one that we just did, is lying flat, because you can feel the work that happened, the space that you made, that reversing of any natural rounding that's happening in the upper back. And maybe you feel longer lying down after a back bend. And start to walk the feet in. So soles of the feet to the mat. Press into the feet, scoot the hips over to the left, bring the knees over to the right. So you're coming into a spinal twist. You could take one of those blocks and put it between the knees. That'll give you a little bit extra space in the lower back. Left arm can reach out to the side and gaze can fall over the left arm. So staying on your back in a reclined twist, starting to get the spine going in a different direction. Trying to keep it easy though. So you're not going all the way into the twist. For the shapes that you do, that your body naturally wants to go into, some of us really like back bending, some of us really like twists. You'll find that you kind of have to pull back on the throttle because you'll naturally want to go deeper into those poses. And while it's fine if the body's open enough for that, you just don't want to be putting too much effort into it. And take a deep breath in through the nose. Slowly back out. Bring the head back to center. If you're using a block, set it off to the side. Find center on your back again. Once you find center on your back, bring the knees in toward the chest, knees and feet together. Start to move the knees around in a circle, getting those hips to move around underneath you on the mat. And then switch the direction of the circles, go the other way. Set the feet back down onto the mat. Press into the feet, scoot the hips over to the right. Knees come over to the left, perhaps a block between the knees. Right arm reaches outside the shoulder, and the head can turn toward the right if the neck's okay with it. So just see where you naturally want to point the nose. Close the eyes if you're comfortable. Maybe the left hand rests on the body somewhere. Evening out the twist, going in the other direction. And as you fall deeper into the twist, just naturally staying with the cycle of breath in and out through the nose, listening to the sound of your own breath. You'll bring the head back to center. If you have a block, set it off to the side. Soles of the feet come back to the mat. Bring the knees in so you can hang onto the knees with the hands and start to move the knees around in circles, keeping the knees and the feet together. And you'll start to switch the direction, go the other way. Then bringing the feet back down to the mat, roll over to your right side. Use the left hand to bring yourself up to seated. If you have a bolster, it might be nice for this next one. You don't need any props though. So if you don't have a bolster, don't worry about it. You'll bring the bolster toward the top of the mat the long way. Bring it out in front of the body. So don't worry about it yet. You'll come down onto your stomach. Sphinx pose is the setup, but we'll come into a shoulder opening. So you'll start with the hips down on the mat, the legs down on the mat. All of that's relaxed. Turn the hands in. So with the forearms down, one forearm in front of the other, both flat down on the ground. And then with your chin, you want it to be ahead of this top forearm. So you might need to walk the forearms back a little bit to make that happen. And then start to move the hands away from you, and you'll start to feel a deep shoulder opening begin to happen. Once you do that, the head can come down, and here's where you can use the bolster. You can bring the bolster in if it's high enough. Maybe it's not. You can bring the bolster in and rest the forehead on the bolster, and that just gives you a place to relax the neck. It could be a block, could be a couple of pillows, a lot of different options. And some of you, it's fine if you can hook the chin over the front arm and just let the head and the neck go. You don't even need anything under the forehead, but sometimes we can touch down on that pressure point there. We can find a little bit more ease in the shape. And if your shoulders are tight, this will be a pose that you wouldn't go as deep in. But this is how you open them up. And it's the length of time that makes this more therapeutic. And the same thing can be said for so many different things. I was working out at the gym this morning and we were doing lunges, but at the bottom of the lunge was a pause. So we stepped back to a lunge and then we had to hold it for longer than we typically would, and then step forward to the other side. Well, I didn't do as many lunges because of the pause. It was so much harder to hold it, stay there, and then come forward and switch sides. And yin sometimes is the same thing, or any type of physical yoga practice. Sometimes we move a little bit faster and that, builds energy in the body, and that's good for us. But we build strength when we slow down. and not just physically, but mentally too. You'll start to lift the head up, bring the elbows back in, and then you'll switch the crossing of the arms. So bring the other forearm in front. You'll need to make sure the chin is ahead of the top forearm. Start to widen the hands away from you until you feel like you find a nice opening across the upper back, shoulders. Head can come down. Close the eyes. Right back in on the other side. So if your head was to come low, you should be able to hook the chin on the front arm. That's how you know the arms are in the right place. So if the head comes down and your face is hitting the arms, then the arms need to walk back more underneath you. Begin to lift the head up, walk the elbows back in. You're using this bolster. You can set it off to the side and you'll come up to hands and knees. So bring the hands to the mat, come up to hands and knees, feet go to one side, and you're coming to seated on the mat with the legs out in front of you. Have the bolster nearby. Some of you might want to use it. So bring the sole, the right foot to the mat, cross the right foot over the left leg, grab this outer right ankle, move it off to the side. So you're working towards stacking the knees. You're in half shoelace if you keep that bottom leg extended, or you can lean to the left, bend the bottom leg, make sure both hips can get down on the mat. So if they can't then you can either extend that bottom leg or you can prop the hips up on a block or a bolster, and that'll make this a little bit more accessible. So from here in shoelace pose, we're coming into our first major hip opening. You could start to fold down over the legs. If you feel like there's space, you might feel enough of a hip opening to just sit up tall. Blocks could go underneath the hands. They could go underneath the forearms. They could go underneath the head if you're coming down far enough for that. Make sure you're not sitting on the feet. Both sit bones are evenly down on the mat, and you're in an easy place, whatever that is for you. Blocks have 3 heights too, so don't be committed to just using one height. You may want to play around with lowering the blocks, raising the blocks, seeing what's too high, what's too low, so that you can find just right. And with these hip openings, just like all of the other poses, it is important to stay focused on our breath. You'll get so much more out of the shape if you can. And that also means keeping your mind on your mat. Trying not to leave your mat with your thoughts. Easier said than done, but we just keep practicing so that we can get better at it. And you start finding what tricks work for you. Yoga has lots of suggestions. You'll start to bring the chest back up. If you have any props in front of you, set those off to the side. Bring the hands back behind you. Extend the bottom leg first if it's bent, then the top leg. Soles of the feet wide to the mat, and the knees go side to side, windshield wipers. So that was a bigger hip opening. We definitely want to take some time to counter it before we transition over to the other side. But it's so great for the lower body, all of the joints in the lower body, hips, knees, ankles, feet. Okay, let's come back to seated, legs out in front of you. This time, you'll take the left foot to the mat, step the left foot over the right leg, grab onto the outer left ankle bone, move it off to the side, working to stack the knees. However that's happening in your body is fine. Maybe you lean over to the right, bend the right leg, but still keep the feet so that they're not underneath the body. They can be close to the body. They can be farther out from the body. See where your comfort level is, but both sit bones are evenly down on the mat. Then if you'd like, you can stay here, just sitting up tall, breathing, or you could put more weight on the hips and the lower body, walking the hands forward, maybe using blocks. I liked using them as armrests. That's about where my body wanted to fold forward. So see what's happening on your side. And also you might be different hip to hip. So maybe you want to go down a little lower, or maybe you want to stay up a little higher on this side. Definitely adjust for that. if you're feeling that calling. About another minute here. So see where you can ease up. Maybe notice if you've come in a little bit deeper without forcing yourself. Appreciating how the body naturally knows where it needs to be. And let's start to come back up. Use the hands to come back up to seated. Set any props off to the side if you're using them. Bring the hands back behind you, leaning back. Bottom leg extends, top leg extends. Then soles of the feet to the mat, knees wide, knees side to side, back to your windshield wipers. And you can play with bringing the knees down closer to the ground. That is a hip opening. But we're keeping the movement going so we can start to transition to another pose and shake some of this one off. Okay, so back to seated. Here's where you'll need your straps. You'll want to grab that. Come on down onto your back. Keep the soles of the feet on the mat, head on the mat. If you're using a strap, loop the sole of the right foot into the strap. We won't use the loop just yet. So loop this, put the sole of the right foot into the strap, grab onto the strap with both hands. You want that strap to be at the top of the arch, just below the ball of the foot. And you can have a bend in the knee, the leg can be straight, it's up to you. Left foot can stay on the mat, or you could extend that left leg forward. You want to listen to the lower back and make sure the lower back is comfortable if the leg's extended out in front of you. If it's not, bring the sole of the foot back to the mat. And if you're not using a strap, you can interlace the fingers behind the back of the right thigh. And that's how you do the same shape without a strap. We'll all have the toes coming down toward the face. Hands can be closer to the foot if you're using a strap, or they can slide all the way back, elbows, upper arms rest on the mat. So if you're using a strap that has a loop, move the buckle so it's somewhere between the foot and the upper body. So you want to, I have mine on the side. So that way it's within reach, but it's not touching the body and you can still see it. and then make a triangle with the strap. We're all going to have to do this a little differently depending on the length of the strap. Lift the head up. Maybe you place the head in the strap. So making like a hammock shape. Strap outside the ears if that's working. If you need to adjust the strap, if it's too long, pull back on that tail until you get it to the right length. And then you can start to push the foot away from you, the right foot away from you, and the head back. Arms can just rest down on the mat. And as you feel that tension in the strap because the right foot's moving away from you, head's going back toward the mat, you start to feel a nice opening in the backside of the right leg. And if it's too much, slip the head out, just hang on to the strap the way that we started, and you can do the opening that way. Eyes can close if you're comfortable. And blink open the eyes. If you have the strap around the head, grab both ends of the strap, lift the head up and out of the strap, setting it back down to the mat. Sole of the left foot comes to the mat. If you're using a strap, set the strap off to the side. And you'll come right into the other side. So loop the sole of the left foot into the strap, extend that left leg up. You want to make sure you know where that buckle is. You want the tail to be in the right spot so that if you pull down on it, you would make it just the right length. So grab onto both ends of the strap, start here first, sole the right foot on the mat. You could be hanging onto the back of the left thigh. Left toes come down toward the face, heel goes up, and that's how you start to find some length in the leg. Maybe the hands reach up toward the foot, or maybe you slide the hands back, resting the elbows, upper arms on the mat. Just keep some tension in the strap wherever you go. Right foot can stay on the mat, but you've already done a lot of leg opening on that side. So maybe you play with extending that right leg forward. Maybe it'll feel longer than it did before. And if you're not feeling anything, the closer the left leg comes in toward the body, the more intense this gets. So finding the right amount of effort. Okay, move the buckle away from you. Make that triangle shape with the strap by pulling the hands apart, still hands like you're making corners in the strap. Lift the head up, bring the head inside the strap, maybe the around the ears, the outside edges of the ears. Arms can come down, push the foot away from you, head goes back. You might need to make an adjustment. It's typical that you're not going to want the strap on the same size on both sides. So you have time, make adjustments if you need to. Don't just make it happen, but you want to find just the right spot And take a deep breath right where you are. Slowly back out through the nose. You'll start to blink open the eyes, grab onto the strap if it's around the head, widen the strap so you can take the head out, set it back down onto the mat. Strap goes off to the side, hug the knees in toward the chest. You can rock side to side. Then set the feet down onto the mat, roll over to one side, use the hands to bring yourself up. So this next one, you'll want the blocks. You'll come forward to hands and knees with the blocks underneath the hands. Probably using the blocks, either the medium height, or you could do let's do the tallest height. That's the easiest transition if you're using blocks. And if you're not using blocks, then hands are just down on the mat. So blocks are out in front of you. They're wide toward the outer edges of the mat. Step the right foot forward and you're coming into a lunge. So you can start to sink the hips, lift the chest up. Might be nice to get this hip opening with the leg bent since we've had the leg straight. And we're using this as a transition. So here for a few more breaths. Now start to shift the hips back, walk the blocks back, and straighten the front leg. So you're coming into half splits. You want this left hip to be over the left knee. So most of us have to push that right heel forward. Keep reaching the heart forward over the toes. So you want a long upper back. Maybe the blocks go down a little lower, especially if you're on the tallest height. You should feel like you're bringing that right foot in toward the body, reaching the heart forward. So this is, again, another transition. So you'll just stay here for a few breaths. Check this out. It's very similar to what we were doing on our back with the leg up, getting into the same part of the leg. But we did that so that we could explore this pose a little deeper. So you could stay here. This is a great place to be half splits. You could also play with the fuller version of splits, which could be a part of yin. A class like today where we've been playing with this shape. So if that's the case, you want to start to move that back leg back. Hands will need to walk back so they're more underneath the shoulders. And then once you find an easy place to be for your splits, keep the chest lifted so you're not leaning forward, hands underneath the shoulders. Hips are probably lifted. So you have a couple of options. You could put a block underneath that right hip, right thigh, and stay there, just keeping the chest lifted. And this is a nice hip opening, a nice leg opening, and you stay here. You could use a bolster if you feel like you're high enough for that and just slide it all the way across underneath the hips the wide way, or 2 stacked blankets, something to, and if you're all the way down on the ground, great. And that's easy for you, then that's where you stay. But we'll be here for a little while. So make sure you're not putting much effort into being where you are. And if you feel like it's just too intense, then come back to half splits with that left thigh vertical, left hip right over the left knee. So some version of splits. Maybe see if you can close the eyes, if that's something that helps you calm the mind. And if you're in a fuller version of splits, you'll start to shift over, especially if you have any props underneath the hips, remove the props out from underneath you. You start to bring that back knee forward, walk the hands forward a little bit, come onto the sole of the right foot, working your way back to a lunge. So keep scooting that left knee in, and then bring the blocks to the tallest height, out wide if you're using them, or hands on the mat. Right knee comes down underneath you. Then you'll simply switch sides. So left foot steps forward. We start with this runner lunge first. Keep the chest lifted, hips go low, so you can start to open up the hips in the direction that we're headed in. This is a nice way, doing a dragon, which is what you're in right now, is a nice way to come into that a fuller version of splits. The hips open very similarly, but you're also asking some work in the legs too. So you get that bend in the knee now, knowing that that leg's going to be straight in another breath or two. Okay, so we'll start to move into half splits first. Shift the hips back, walk the blocks back, straighten the front leg, push the heel forward. Maybe the block's lower unless you feel like you're right where you need to be. Start here. So we're just preparing the body for potentially a deeper variation into the pose. So if you're fine here, stay here. If you are working towards something bigger, you could get the blocks, props around you. So if you want to try the bolster, you can try that. This is also a shape where you're most likely going to see a difference in one side over the other. That makes it, this one makes it more apparent than others. So maybe you start to walk the blocks back a little bit, start to tuck the back toes, scoot that right knee back, go slow because you don't want to come too far in and then have to back out. Hands stay underneath the shoulders, get the blocks as high up as you want. Once you find your easy version of a fuller version of splits, then maybe start to fill in the spaces. So that left hip's lifted, put something underneath it, could be a block, bolster. Keep the hands down so you stay relaxed. And the legs are still hip width distance apart. So sometimes the legs will start to go a little wide. Make sure the left foot and the right foot are still hip width distance apart, even though they're going in different directions. Hips are still low, chest is high. There's a little bit of a scissoring action of the inner thighs so that you can keep the hips side by side. Sometimes when we come into splits, in this particular instance, the right hip would be behind the left hip, and we want them to be side by side. So you stay in the hip opening and keep that length in the legs, which is a harder way to come into a fuller version of splits. But that's the form we're looking for. Come back to your breath if you've lost sight of it, and just let the body go back to breathing on its own. And we'll start to come out. So if you have anything underneath the left hip, lift it, shift over to the right, start to bring the legs closer together, walking the hands and the blocks forward, scooting that back knee in, and then eventually you'll get the sole of the left foot down on the mat, coming back to your lunge. Blocks at the tallest height underneath the shoulders. Bring that left knee back behind you, feet over to one side, come to seated, have the blocks nearby within reach, legs out in front of you. If you're way back on your mat, scoot forward. Let's use the blocks and the bolster for Shavasana. So bring the bolster back behind you the wide way so it's a pillow. Blocks will go on the lowest height, the wide way underneath the thighs. You want to turn the toes out, give yourself plenty of space. As you come on down onto your back, adjust the bolster so it supports the head and the neck. Extend the legs out. Blocks are underneath the thighs, keeping the knees lifted. Close the eyes, palms face up. Shavasana. Final relaxation pose. And it should feel nice to elevate the knees after all the work we did on the legs today. You'll start to wiggle the fingers and the toes, get some movement back into the body. Walk the feet in, bending the knees. And you can use some combination of the feet and the hands to set the blocks off to the side so they're out of the way. Roll over to your right side. Maybe keep the head on the bolster, eyes still closed. And when you feel ready, use the left hand to press yourself up to a comfortable seat on the mat. You could be using a prop too, but you're coming to some version of your meditation seat, sitting up tall, eyes closed. Bring the hands together in front of you to close your practice. Bow the head, take a moment to honor and acknowledge your heart and your spirit. And just as important, everyone else around you. Bring the head back up, blink open the eyes. Namaste. Thanks for sharing your practice. That was a big one today. Splits is not a small pose. It's a big one. We worked up to it. Hope that wherever you ended up, that felt good for you. It was definitely full body. And thanks for joining. I'll see you next time.